I want to accent first this notion that when you think of poverty in Newark, in America, and the world, you're talking about a state of emergency. And the sad thing is we don't have enough people who believe that it is have a sense of urgency and that it is a state of emergency. So the question for me is, as someone who looks at the world through the vantage point of the cross as a Christian, that tells me that poor people ought to have a priority. It's the least of these. It's the orphan, the widow, the fatherless, the motherless, the subjugated. Why is it that we live in a nation, it's the richest nation in the history of the world, 20% of its children live in poverty, every color, each one precious, 42% of red, 39% of brown, 38% of black. But there's no state of emergency. We got state of emergency in Iraq, Afghanistan, Wall Street's in trouble. Not a state of emergency when it comes to poor people. But that means, of course, what? Our priorities are warped, from my point of view. Priorities are warped. Well, what's going on then? Well, you got greed at the top. You got corporate greed. You got greed of Wall Street oligarchs. You got greed of the powerful at the top, who are willing to be obsessed with the lives of rich and famous and want to live in the lap of luxury while everyday people are catching hell at the bottom.
All right.
Then you got a middle class that is overworked and indifferent toward poor people and therefore lukewarm, turning their backs. It's not as if they hate poor folk, but they just don't have time to deal with their situation, because most middle class folk are nothing but working class folk with a bourgeois identity anyway. That's true. And our working class has been pushed against the wall. Higher taxes, wage stagnation for 25 years as corporate profits have been escalating, productivity going up, trade unions weak, communities feeble, and in poor communities, bullets flying with drugs being sold, with terror being wrought on each other, as well as the repressive apparatus of the nation state, which is to say the police and the helicopters and the jails and the prisons and the new Jim Crow, the prison industrial complex. So you got corporate greed at the top.
Yes.
You got indifference among the middle class, working class folk who think highly of themselves, thinking that somehow they've made it, but they haven't when they lose their job. And that's what we're experiencing right now, downward mobility. Then you got depression poor folk who are invisible. We got an election today. Can you name one politician, any color, any party, that talked about poor people at the center? Not one of those motherfuckers. Not one. All these poor people, and not one mentions poor people. What the heck is going on? I'm serious. Something is sick about that. Something is pathological about that. Now the question becomes, poor people themselves. What are they doing?
That's right. There you go.
Disorganized.
All right.
Discouraged.
Yes.
Degrading to one another too much.
Yes. Yes.
And for black poor people, given the history of black people, because almost every ex-Negro I know comes from a poor family if you look far enough back. I might be middle class now, but I come from black poor. My grandmother went to second grade. I just got lucky. I worked hard, but I got lucky. Social movements came along, created opportunity. People died for me. So I can seize opportunity.
All right.
So I'm an extension of the very, very poor people on the block right now. And we don't have enough black people. When they see Letitia and Jamal on the block, they don't understand themselves as an extension of them, and them being an extension of you. All of a sudden you move up and you separate yourself. You're severed from them. You're distant from them. You're making it now. And the result is what? We in a mess. A deep mess. The empire's in decline, the culture's in decay. The young folk out of control, titillated, stimulated, no deep sense of nourishment, no deep sense of empowerment, and we don't have organized motion or momentum or movements to try to lift our voices that highlight the situation of the poor. You end up with Tea Party activists. They on the move. What is their agenda in relation to poor people? We won't even go into that. You can guess. They side with the strong and then the powerful against the weak and the vulnerable. So when we talk about poverty, there is an individual dimension, there's an institutional dimension, there's a personal dimension, and there's a structural dimension.
All right.
It has to do with city, state, world, and in a capitalist world economy where the end and aim is profit, 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 poor people are always an afterthought. And there's something sick about that, but that's another lecture.
All right.